Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 24 hours. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And during this video we're going to discuss the most important update. The most important piece of news is that the United States of America stopped supplying and sending weapons and arms to Ukraine. This is very important and this is a very critical question for Ukrainians. Furthermore, during this video we're going to discuss the situation on the ground. During the same period of time, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly, especially in the Pokrovsk, Konstantinovka and the South Donetsk directions, and in the Zaporizhia direction as well. Furthermore, during this video we're going to talk about several missiles and Iskander strikes that took place during the same period of time. The Russians attacked several recruit centers and industrial zones, some warehouses and ammo depots, which is also very critical due to the fact that the United States of America stopped sending weapons. So let's discuss and let's start with this the situation with the United States of America. According to information we have, the Pentagon freezed critical American ammunition supplies to Ukraine, and this is a signal that Washington is leaving the war. That was stated by the New York Times. Of course, the Ukrainians are trying to probably chill out people, trying to tell them that this is just rumors, talks, and something like this. This is not real information. Everything that's published by the media was not an official information. The Ukrainians should expect and wait for official statements. At least this was stated by the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, who is the second person of Ukraine. But later we got additional clarifications and confirmations that yes, the Pentagon has suspended the supply of air defense systems, missiles and other precision-guided munitions to Ukraine due to concerns about the depletion of its own stockpiles. And later we got the list of weapons that Ukraine will not see in the future. This is the list, and the list is very important because here is the list of US munitions approved for Ukraine by now being held in Poland. We're talking about 92 AIM missiles, 30 Patriot missiles, very important thing, around 9,155 millimeter howitzer rounds, this is a lot, 142 Hellfire missiles, anti-tank missiles, 252 missiles for HIMARS systems, 25 Stinger missiles, and 125 grenade launchers. This is very important package that Ukrainians waited. The Russians currently are advancing along the entire line of combat contact, and the Ukrainians were relying on this package with the purpose to reinforce some direction, either let's say the Sumi direction or the Pokrovsk direction, but now most likely Ukrainians will be forced to find another way how to reinforce their positions. At the same time, the Russians continue attacking the territory of Ukraine with drones and missiles. And for example, during the previous 12 hours, we got lots of very interesting explosions and attacks. The first one and the biggest explosion took place in the area of the city by the name of Zhytomyr, which is located to the west of the capital of Ukraine, the city of Kyiv. And this is exactly the video I'm talking about. So in this video we can see a very heavy explosion that took place in this area, right exactly in this area. Very heavy explosion. The sources reported that there used to be some Polish companies, and we understand that it may be just Ukrainian rumors or something like this, but very heavy explosion. Obviously this wasn't something like agricultural agricultural depot for agricultural technique or something like this. Obviously something like an ammo depot was destroyed as a result of Russian precision attack. So in this video we can see the same explosion, but from another angle. Furthermore, according to information we have, at least 2 people dead and 15 injured after explosion near Zhytomyr. Furthermore, we have a picture of a fire anomaly in this area, and this is exactly the place that was attacked by the Russians. Very heavy explosion. As for now we don't know for sure what exactly the Russians managed to destroy as a result of this attack, but obviously something big and something huge, and this is very important due to the situation that the Pentagon suspended any supply and support to Ukraine. Another important strike, an attack carried out by the Russians, took place probably several minutes ago in the area of the city by the name of Poltava. This time the Russians attacked the city with drones, not with missiles, and with drones. In this video we can see the consequences of attack, smoke screen, and this is the moment when the Russians attacked this territory. As you can see in this video, right exactly in this moment, we can see an explosion itself, and at the beginning of this video we could see Russian drone that was flying in this area. This is the second drone that's attacked. So according to this video and according to reports, there were up to 5 drones that attacked this territory. And when talking about this building, the Russians destroyed a recruiting center in the city of Poltava, a center that Ukrainians used to mobilize people, at least in the Poltava district, or at least in the city of Poltava itself. And I would like to point your attention that this is not the first attack on the recruiting center that was carried out by the Russians. Several days ago, the Russians attacked the recruiting center in the city of Kryvyi Rog. So this is the moment when the Russians attacked another center. And this is, and you know that after this attack in Kryvyi Rog, there were several articles and statements made by different sources, and the most important, that people all over Ukraine were sharing with their opinions regarding this attack. And telling the truth, when the Russians attacked this recruit center in the city of Kryvyi Rog, there were a lot of happy people. They made their own comments, they put their likes in this area, and they were very happy that the Russians attacked this recruiting center. So most likely the Russians decided to confirm this probably idea, these tactics, by attacking another recruiting center in the city of Poltava, and to make another, let's say, line of tests to understand whether this approach is good. I'm talking about whether the Ukrainians are happy with these Russian attacks or not. And most likely this attack on the Poltava recruiting center would be also probably confirmed, approved, and by people of Ukraine and by people of the Poltava district. So we see that the very interesting situation develops, and most likely the Russians will continue their attacks all over the entire territory of Ukraine with the purpose to destroy as many as possible recruiting centers, which obviously can lead also to collapse of the entire mobilization process of Ukraine. Another important thing that we need to understand, that all these attacks on Ukrainian military facilities, Ukrainian warehouses, ammo depots, and recruiting centers with the suspension of arms supplies to Ukraine by the United States of America, all these things have just one purpose. During the next week, Zelensky must make a very difficult decision. He must either to prolong the martial law that is currently taking place on the territory of Ukraine, either he needs to stop the martial law and to start the president elections. And all this pressure has just one purpose: to force the Ukrainians to stop the martial law and to begin real elections and to begin the real process that will lead to the end of the war with the Russian Federation. So let's wait and see, because the next 2 weeks obviously are going to be very interesting in perspective of this question. Now let's return to the line of combat contact, and first let's talk about the Sumi direction. During the previous 36 hours we got very interesting updates, and first of all is that the Russians, according to several pro-Russian resources, managed to secure the Tyotkina region completely. I would like to remind you that since March of 2025 the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to probably establish control over the settlement of Tyotkina, but all attacks of the 33rd Regiment and 425th Regiments and 47th Brigade were repelled by the Russians. Ukrainians suffered losses and were forced to fall back from this area completely. As for now, we are just keeping this information in our minds without making any changes on the ground until we get additional clarifications or geolocations. As for the Sumi direction itself, for the first time, probably since the beginning of this Russian offensive operation, we got report from more or less reliable pro-Russian resource that the Russian troops managed to establish established complete control over the settlement of Yanakievka. Later, we got several probably reports from different sources that this information is not correct, that there are still Ukrainian soldiers in the most southern part of the settlement and that there are still very heavy clashes. At the same time, the Russians continue bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions along the second defense layer, but without any changes on the ground. Most likely, there are very heavy clashes in the village of Andreevka, but we see that both the Russians and the Ukrainians stopped any attempts to move further. The Russians in the southern direction, the Ukrainians in the northern direction. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians are regrouping themselves and preparing themselves before the second round of the battle for this territory. At the same time, we got probably the most important update is that the Russians are planning to deploy additional 25 till 30,000 troops, so North Korean troops. According to information we have, the DPRK plans to triple its military presence along the front line with Ukraine, citing an Ukrainian intelligence report. At the same time, I would like to remind you that several days ago, the North Koreans deployed 6,000 soldiers. We're talking about 1,000 sappers and 5,000 engineers. So now they want to move additional 30,000, and obviously these units would be used by the Russians, obviously on the territory of the Sumi region itself. I would like to remind you that according to intelligence, US intelligence, the Russians concentrated up to 50,000 soldiers already. So we are adding additional 6,000 of engineers and sappers and 30,000 of troops, and we're going to receive 86,000 soldiers in this area, and this will be probably 4 or 5 times more soldiers than Ukrainians have in the same area, which will lead obviously to complete collapse of the Sumi defensive armored force of Ukraine, and it will force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area or to redeploy additional forces, let's say from the Pokrovsk or from the Zaporizhia direction, with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But anyway, this will lead to complete collapse of some defense, probably on some other direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kharkiv area, where the Russians continue their offensive operation in the western part of the city. Today we got additional batch of geolocations and videos published by the Ukrainian side, how they were bombing and attacking Ukrainian units in the direction of different settlements. One of the episodes of this long video was geolocated exactly in this point, which means that the Russians managed to secure this tree line completely. I would like to remind you that several pro-Russian resources reported that at least 50% or the northern part of this forest to the west of the city of Volchansk was already secured by the Russians, but as for the beginning of the 2nd of July, we still haven't received anything that can confirm this progress on the ground. Anyway, let's wait for additional updates, because most likely something interesting is happening here right now, but obviously this is just the battle for the initiative, and as for the beginning of the 2nd of July, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians have full control over this initiative. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. And because during the previous 48 hours, most likely the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack Russians in the area of Kruglyakivka, Zagryzovo and Boguslavka, the Ukrainians used lots of vehicles, lots of forces with the purpose to both cross the river of Oskol and to attack the Russian positions from the south with the purpose to cut this pocket completely. And as you can see, we have geolocations. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were moving in the direction of Boguslavka, but the Ukrainians were ambushed and destroyed. The Russians used the distance mining method. They mined the roads in the direction of Boguslavka, and Ukrainian vehicles were destroyed. At the same time, the Ukrainians were trying to concentrate their forces on the Ukrainian side of the river of Oskol. We're talking about FPV drone operators that were attacking the Russians in the territory Kruglyakivka and Zagryzovo. The Russians managed to discover these positions and to destroy them. But at the same time, today pro-Russian resources published this video, very important video, and here we can see how Russians were attacking Ukrainians in this direction with FPV drones and artillery. This video is pretty long, 2 minutes and 50 seconds almost, and here we can see how Russians were FPV droning Ukrainian positions in the inside of the settlement of Kruglyakivka. One of the episodes of this long video took place exactly in this building, and we came to the conclusion that Ukrainians most likely managed to cross the river of Oskol to establish complete control over this huge forest along the railways and to take some buildings in this area under complete control. control. But telling the truth, several pro-Russian resources adjusted their maps as if the Ukrainians managed to restore complete control over the entire village of Boguslavka and the southern parts of Zaporizhia. So we are waiting for additional updates, but something strange is currently taking place here. We are waiting for additional geolocations to understand how exactly the Ukrainians managed to probably attack and how exactly the Ukrainians managed to dig in deeper in the area of these villages. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of Zhytomyr Kut. Several pro-Russian resources reported that some tree lines and positions of the armored forces of Ukraine were taken in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Zhytomyr Gai. As for the southern direction or the Lyman direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement Shandrigalova along the river of Nitrius and in the area of the settlement of Karpovka. And according to information we have, the Russians took under control this part of the village of Karpovka and these tree lines. So we see that the Russians continue their offensive operation, but as for now, the Russians still haven't managed to finish the battle for the settlement of Zelyona Dolina, despite the fact that according to several sources, the village was already caught in cauldron by the armored forces of the Russian Federation. Now let's move further and let's discuss probably the most important updates and probably the most important area. We are talking about the city of Konstantinovka. And first let's talk about the city of Chasiv Yar. According to information we have, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the area. During the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the city of Chasiv Yar itself. And we can say that by the morning of the 3rd of July of 2025, the Russians secured around 95% of the city of Chasiv Yar. The Ukrainians controlled just 5% of the settlement, and most likely Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area in the very near future. The final round of Russian offensive operation in this area started somewhere on the 30th of June of 2025, and after this date we were adjusting the map almost every single day in Russian favor. This is the situation by the end of the 1st of July of 2025. The Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their position significantly, and they secured the Shevchenko micro-district completely. Furthermore, pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians answered the village of Nikolaevka, at least its eastern part. During the 2nd of July, there were very heavy clashes in this area. The Ukrainians were trying to send units, forces and troops with the purpose to stabilize the situation in the central part of the village of Nikolaevka, with the purpose not to allow the Russians to move further in the direction of the city of Konstantinovka. But the problem is that the Russians established complete control over the main supply lines and the main roads and main possible positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, and the Russians were bombing and attacking these territories with all type of calibers they have. And by the morning of the 3rd of July of 2025, we got reports that the Russians secured the village of Nikolaevka completely. And this is not just the city of Chasiv Yar itself. We are talking about villages around the city, which is obviously a huge problem for the Ukrainians and huge progress on the ground of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, after the fall of Nikolaevka and after the Russians answered the village of Chervona, several sources reported that the Russians continued their offensive operation in the southern part of the city of Chasiv Yar and took in pincers the Ukrainian positions in the micro-district of Yuzhny. So this is another micro-district of the city of Chasiv Yar, probably pre-final one, and most likely the next days the Russians will begin the battle for the final micro-district of the city of Chasiv Yar. We are talking about the micro-district of Zemlyanki. So these days the Russians most likely will be concentrated on securing this area, and after they finish the battle for this territory, the Russians will try to maintain their lines between the villages of Nikolaevka, Chervona and micro-district of Yuzhny, and then the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the direction of Zemlyanki. This will allow the Russians probably in upcoming week or by the end of this week to announce complete control over the city of Chasiv Yar, and we will see first videos with Russian flags over the entire city. At the same time, it's still unclear the situation with the Ukrainians who are currently located in this pocket, but due to the situation around, we expect that Ukrainians would try to evacuate their soldiers during the upcoming hours, not even days. Once again, by the morning of the 3rd of July of 2025, the Russians established control for over more than 95% of the city of Chasiv Yar. Ukrainians control just something around 5%, and most likely they will be forced to abandon and leave and quit these positions in the very near future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where according to information we have, since the beginning of the previous week, the Russians have carried out significant number of attempts to break through Ukrainian defense, and most likely the Russians are about to do this and about to complete this situation. Today several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes the Russians secured the village of Razina, and the village of Razina is already the northeastern outskirts of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. This is very important village, very important position, because from now on the entire defense of the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration was cut in two. Now the Russians will be able to advance both in the northern direction, in the direction of Novotoretsk, Boykovka. The Russians would be able to continue offensive operation in the direction of Novoekonomichne itself. As for the Novoekonomichne itself, I would like to remind you that since the previous week, since the beginning of the previous week, we have received a numerous number of reports that the Russians secured already in the northeastern part, but as you can see the mappers are trying to be very careful with this, despite the fact that there were lots of reports that the Russians established complete control over this territory already. Nobody still has adjusted their maps in this way. Everybody is waiting for some geolocations, because everybody understands that if the Russians indeed enter the northeastern part of Novoekonomichne, this is already the beginning of the end for the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. Without the city of Novoekonomichne, without this northeastern part, Ukrainian defense would not be able to probably to repel Russian attacks in the future, and this will lead obviously to complete collapse. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk or Dnipro direction. We have lots of very interesting updates, and the most important that the Russians indeed managed to cross the river of Mokraya Yali, and currently the Russians are trying to concentrate themselves right in front of the settlement of Pidubne. This information was confirmed by neutral mappers, and this information was confirmed by this video where we can see how Ukrainians of 37th Marine Brigade were attacking Russians on the Ukrainian side of the river of Mokraya Yali, how the Russians were trying to establish control over these territories, and based on this video we adjusted the map. So we believe that today, or maybe these hours, these days, the Russians will make first attempts to attack the village of Pidubne, not with just reconnaissance group but with the regular army. At the same time, the Russians continue bombing and attacking Ukrainian logistic. In this video we can see another number of strikes, series of strikes on Ukrainian positions, Ukrainian bridge in the area of the settlement of Andriivka v the bridge was damaged, and in this moment we can see how Ukrainians were trying to bring additional forces on these banks of the river, but they stopped because they saw that the bridge was almost damaged, almost destroyed. Now let's move further. As for the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources published lots of articles about the situation on the ground, and Ukrainians are saying that the situation is stable, that the Ukrainian units are able to control the situation. There is nothing to worry about, but the main problem for Ukrainians is that the Russians, despite reports of the armed forces of Ukraine in their analytic centers, continue their offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Furthermore, now we can say that the Russians control up to 80% of the village of Kamenska. There's just one block left for the armed force of the Russian Federation. But we believe that this is just a matter of time when the Russians will be able to secure this area. In this video we can see how Russian soldiers were moving along the central part of this village of Kamensk, exactly in this area. And in this video we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning Russians, or how Russians were moving in this area trying to begin the battle for the village of Plavny. Here we can see Russian soldiers that were moving with a drone altogether. The drone was supporting them, and the Russians, as you can see, were entering the southeastern part of the village of Plavny. So today it's not just almost the end of the battle of the Kamenska, but today is the date of the beginning of the village for the second village in this area, the village of Plavny. We see the Ukrainians don't show any resistance, almost any resistance to the Russians. Most likely the Ukrainians are going to make an attempt to stabilize the situation around the settlement of or line of Stepnogorsk, Pavliki, and the city of Orekhov. So most likely this is the area where the Ukrainians would be able to slow down the Russians, or at least to stop them. And everything inside of this area would be taken by the Russians in upcoming days. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.